They're either going to go straight for the planned C-section because they couldn't possibly face the idea of putting themselves through what they went through last time, or they are going to do that work, tune in to the stuff that they need to do in preparation for them stepping into their power next time, because they will not allow those things to happen to them again.
Hi, Sallyann. A big welcome to the podcast. Please start by introducing yourself.
Hello, Rosemary. I'm so excited to be here and have a conversation with you. My name is Sallyann Beresford. I am a doula. I'm also an antenatal educator and an author of 2 books. The first one is Labour of Love, The Ultimate Guide to Being a Birth Partner. And the second one is The Art of Giving Birth, 5 Key Physiological Principles. I'm also a podcaster and have a podcast called The Ultimate Birth Partner Podcast.
Oh, that's amazing. And having been on your podcast previously, I was really excited to invite you on, especially being a midwife and having worked in the NHS. I think doulas often get a bad rep. So I wanted to just, invite you on to really talk about your work and how you help to support women. How did you get into doula and what inspired you to do that?
So I have 4 children. The first one was born in hospital almost 26 years ago, and it was a classic first birth experience. And I had infant resuscitators running into the room at the end to rescue my baby after I'd had an epidural and all sorts of interventions. And I really had become quite surprised by my choices during that birth. And so when I was pregnant with my second child, I really wanted to change the circumstances I found myself in. And I felt water birth would be an absolutely brilliant way to have my baby. And the water pool in the hospital that I that was local to me, they never used the pool. This was back in 2000. They never really used it. And actually, if you spoke to anyone and said, how many water births have you had this year? The answer was 0.
Wow.
And so I spoke to my pregnancy yoga teacher, and she said, if you really do want to have a water birth and you think that is the best way to support your labour, then you're probably going to have your baby at home. And in the end, that's what I decided to do. We hired a pool, and at 37 weeks, the midwife that was my community midwife at the time knocked on my door and said, "Oh, can I come in?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "I just want to let you know that we've had a meeting about you, and there isn't anyone who is willing to facilitate your water birth at home.
Wow.
You can get in the water, but you can't give birth in the water." And I was like, what? This is warm water we're talking about. This is not some really exaggerated thing that would be really scary to somebody. They're literally talking about warm water. And so I spoke to my husband and I said, I really think we're going to need to hire an independent midwife. And he was like, absolutely not. Over my dead body. There's no way we can afford to invest in an independent midwife. It was very close to Christmas, and it was absolutely not. And I said to him, I don't think we can afford not to.
Mm.
And in the end, he said, okay. And so at 37 and a half weeks, we met a wonderful independent midwife, and her name was Sarah, and she was the most incredible woman. And do you know what she did during my birth? Absolutely nothing. She sat on the floor and watched me give birth without any input at all, really. A word of encouragement here, a sip of a drink there. She was absolutely amazing. And I was at home. My husband was putting my son to bed, and he came in at the end and he witnessed her be born. And he was really shocked by the fact that he'd missed the whole birth. It was just under 4 hours long. And the baby was born about 10 to 8 in the evening. And it was the best experience we've ever had. Even now, even after 2 more children, it was still the most empowering, most amazing event that I've ever gone through. And immediately after that birth, my husband and I decided to set up a home birth support group in our area. And so at the beginning of 2001, We started running those monthly from our house meetings and sit down with other dads who were very skeptical, very nervous, really wanted to learn a bit more about what giving birth at home entailed. And we were able to really give across a lot of information that would help them develop their own philosophies of birth and get them to a place where they could make really well-informed decisions. And some did go on to have home births and some didn't. Some may have been transfers from home to hospital during labour, but no one could say that those people weren't very well prepared and very well informed. And during that time, in those early months of running those groups, I just knew that I wanted to help women to learn more in general. I didn't care if they gave birth at home. That was my story. It didn't have to be theirs. Provision, and written the books, recorded the podcast over the last 4 or 5 years, and really helped to support women in a variety of ways, both free and paid. Some of my services are expensive, but many of them are completely free and accessible to anyone who wants to learn more. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the ability to support other doulas on their journey. I'm a doula mentor for Doula UK. And I really do love the idea that anyone can access information, regardless of their means and their situation. And Instagram is also an amazing tool for gaining free support. And I'm over there on @theultimatebirthpartner. So if anyone wants to follow me, please feel free.
That's amazing. You mentioned something, Sallyann, during your birth, your independent midwife did nothing. So for someone who's listening to that, or a woman who is pregnant and maybe thinking about hiring or trying to decide whether the investment is worth it, what do you say to them if they're saying, well, if they did nothing, why would I pay 10 or 12 grand for someone who's going to sit and do nothing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a wide variety of services now, isn't there? There's doulas, there's birth keepers, there's independent midwives. And so there's somebody out there for everybody. And to me, if you're planning to have a birth in as hands-off way as possible, which we would describe as physiological. In the old days, you would call that normal birth or natural birth. And a lot of people still use that terminology. They still think of, oh, a normal birth or a natural. But actually, normal or natural birth is more like a managed birth these days, where things are still done to the body, where things still happen to you. Maybe it's a vaginal examination, maybe it's a cervical sweep, maybe it's being attached to monitors. Things are still done to you that cause you to come out of a physiological state where you are, left alone, untouched, unhurried, undisturbed, to get on with the job of giving birth to your baby in a way that the body is made to do. That's where the support that is with you allows that to happen, enables that to happen, gives you the confidence to know that you are doing it as you are wanting to, as expected by the idea of giving birth physiologically. So for me, if somebody was to say, why would I pay for a person to come and sit with me who isn't going to do anything? What you're gaining is the ability of someone who is holding space, that has the confidence and competence to know what normal physiological birth looks like, that can support you if things do change and can give you ideas about what you could do next, if that were to be the case, that can help you if decisions need to be made at any time. If you were to lose your confidence and feel like, actually, I'm not sure I can do this anymore, they can help keep you on track. There's so much they bring to that room. And what I would say to my clients is, if I do nothing, your birth went brilliantly. If, however, things do arise then that person is immediately on hand to help support you in the event that you have a wobble, have a moment of doubt. If you see something that isn't normal, blood loss, meconium in your waters, if the midwife is listening to the heart rate and it isn't showing signs of being as it should be, discussions can be had, support can be given, information can be shared. You can have a really great level of support for both you and your partner in that moment, which is worth its weight in gold.
Amazing. I agree. And actually, to spring off that doing nothing, in many ways, I think the independent midwife or her presence did a lot, because certainly for your husband who wasn't really on board with the idea, then going on to you both, forming a community group. So I would say that was really a springboard for a lot. I think you and both of you have, I'm sure, have made an impact on the community around you. So in many ways it's done a lot of things, just, even your husband being able to see and not even hear you, but almost miss the birth. That's how sort of,
Yeah.
easygoing it went. What would you also say about dads who are, or husbands who are very anti the idea of a woman giving birth in her own space? How have you had to support women that you're working with to kind of really sow seeds into their partners or their husbands to help win them around?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Rosemary. I mean, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because a lot of women, if they are very keen for their husbands to be their main birth partner, and giving birth at home is really important to them, and their partner doesn't understand that, then it's very difficult, because cutting them off from that experience by saying, if you can't support me, then you don't deserve to be there, is a little harsh. It's a little difficult. So what I would do is really try and educate them to help them to see why it's important that they shouldn't shut off a woman's instincts in those ways. So I wrote about this in my book quite a lot, actually, Labour of Love, because for me, no woman should ever be backed into a corner to make a decision. If you have a woman that you are supporting and she mentions the idea that she wants to give birth at home, then let her explore that. Don't say no. Say, that makes me feel uncomfortable, but actually let her explore it, because when women make decisions, they don't say, that's it, I've made a decision, I'm doing this. What they do is they go on a little bit of a roller coaster ride of a journey, and they have days when they feel confident about the idea, and they have days when they are worried, they have doubts, they have moments where they're thinking, should it go wrong? How would that make me feel? Is giving birth at home safe? Is having my baby at home selfish? Am I going to be put in a position where I might be left alone because the midwives call and say, we don't have anyone to send to you? There is a lot of the processing that goes on around that decision making that isn't easy for anyone. And so I always say no woman ever decides to give birth at home lightly. But if you cut them off and say, absolutely not, you cannot do that, then they will not be able to make the right decision at the end. And so explore it, be open, listen, hear what they've got to say and why that might be the idea that they're coming up with. And as the pregnancy progresses and develops, if it remains safe, she may carry on with that option. If things change, the baby isn't growing properly, maybe there's another reason, maybe it doesn't feel safe, maybe she does see that you're fearful and she recognizes that wouldn't be right, then she will come to the decision herself that is not a good place for her. And she will tell you, actually, I've changed my mind. But you always should really come at a place of openness, a place of being able to help support them in exploring their options. And sometimes women will think, okay, maybe home isn't the right place for me. Maybe, though, I could go to the midwife-led unit, which is perhaps not even in their town, but in the next town. Maybe it will open up ideas about getting off of the high needs obstetric labour ward that isn't a good fit for them, because they've opened up to ideas about what physiological birth looks like, and they've considered why giving birth in an environment that is more conducive to physiology would be a better place in general. Yeah, never cut off ideas and thoughts that arise. Always let them explore.
Absolutely. I think that is such a valuable point, because I think birth experience really has the power to strengthen or break relationships. I've seen women develop resentment because their partners did not allow them to give birth in their place of choice, or they didn't feel supported. And I really think it's so important to be on the same page, wherever that place ends up being. But I just think it's so important to be on the same page, because I came across a post like a few months ago on Instagram, and it was this woman just crying her heart out because she had her birth just derailed, and she ended up giving birth in theater. She had a C-section, but she had so much anger and resentment towards her husband because she just felt that he didn't speak up for her, and he just wasn't that birth partner that she really needed. Hence why I think personally doulas are a great option, because sometimes the husband just doesn't know what to say in that moment, because he's also in that position with you, looking towards what you both deem as the professionals. So some men might feel like, who am I to question these professionals? And I think this is where doula really comes in handy. But just being on the same page is so important, because really it has the power to strengthen, and almost renew relationships, and it really can destroy them as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do say one of my sayings is the birth partner can literally make or break the birth experience. And I do think that if your partner wants to have a physiological birth, there is much learning to do. I don't think it's as simple as sitting back and letting her get on with it, because I do think that understanding how physiological birth works is essential, and recognizing the power of the hormones, recognizing the behavior that you bring, the hormonal energy, everything that you have. So if you are quite fearful, if you don't fully understand the process, then having someone else there, if it's a paid person like a doula or birth keeper or independent midwife in general, if that isn't in your budget, then speaking to other people outside of your immediate couple and saying, well, who would be a good fit to come in and support us? Who would be a calming influence? Who is the kind of person that is prepared to do the work, the learning, to understand how physiology works and how important it is to be an advocate for you if you need one in any given moment? Because it's very difficult to know when things can go off plan, and you don't want to be the one to sabotage the birth in that moment by saying to her, oh, just listen to the doctor, he knows best. No, you have to learn to trust her above and beyond everyone else in that room, because you're the one going home. Whichever way you look at it, you're going home together. That caregiver, that provider of care, be it the midwife, the maternity support worker, the doctor, whoever it is that may be trying to sway her out of her options, out of her preferences and changing her philosophies in that moment, they're not coming home with you. You'll never see them again, probably. You need to remember that her instincts are crucial to this process, and allowing her the freedom to tune into them and being an advocate for her in that moment is absolutely crucial. And if you're not up to the job, you need to find someone to join you that is.
And speaking of birth partners, How have you had to navigate family dynamics when the birth partner is the mother and they're very opinionated and they bring in their own birth experiences and say, well, in my day it was like this, and very skeptical about the woman giving birth at home? How have you had to deal with those kind of situations?
Regardless of where the birth is going to take place, if the mother is going to be present, she needs to let go of her own birth experiences to some extent and not bring that baggage with her. It's very hard to work alongside couples whose mothers are going to be at the birth if they are very opinionated. And sometimes we do have to work hard on helping them to overcome their issues. My book, Labour of Love, is written for mothers, for sisters, for cousins, for family members in general, friends, anyone who have views and opinions that are different to yours. Because again, it helps them to recognize that this is not their body. This is your body. And they need to recognize that maternity services have changed and developed from when they gave birth to now. And things are very different. What we know is very different, what we understand. A perfect example of this is 26 years ago when I gave birth. When the baby's head was being born, a midwife would feel for the cord. And if they found the cord around the baby's neck, even if it was just draped around like a scarf, not actually wrapped around a few times like you might fear or worry about, regardless of what they discovered, they would panic, they would cut the umbilical cord, and they would sever the oxygen supply to the baby. Nowadays, they know, so in a very short window of time, midwives understand that is very bad practice and they don't feel for the cord, or they shouldn't feel for the cord. And as the baby is born, they simply unravel the baby and hopefully allow the cord to do its job of pulsating and emptying of blood from the placenta to the baby, allowing the baby their full blood complement of an additional 30%, which isn't additional at all. It just happens to be in the placenta at the point of birth, and it needs a few minutes to transfer into the baby. In that short space of time, mothers have no idea that is completely different from when they gave birth to their children. And when you talk to them about this change in practice, they are mind blown. And it really helps them to understand the difference between non-physiological birth and physiological birth. Because as soon as you start talking to them about the benefits of optimal cord clamping and how babies, once they get all of their blood that belongs to them and it flows into their body, and you show them the difference between the colour of a baby who didn't get their full blood complement and the colour of a baby who did, and all of the benefits they gain from immediate skin to skin and temperature regulation and the microbiome of the baby and their gut and the seeding of that. They are so incredibly impressed that they are then open to listen and receive information about the rest of the process. The earlier part, the part that happens in labour, when women are allowed to give birth instinctively and intuitively. And then they start to recognize why, when they gave birth in bright lights and busy maternity wards with lots of noise and not feeling safe and secure, perhaps that's why their births didn't go well. Perhaps that's why they had very long and difficult birth experiences. And of course, giving them material to read and other things and listening to the podcast episodes and helping them to really tune into that knowledge, that's what helps them change their mindset, and it really does bring them round to their understanding of why their child is making these decisions that perhaps they couldn't initially understand.
For those unclear about what a doula actually does, so let's say there's a woman who wants to hire a doula when what she really wants or needs is an independent midwife. How do you define your roles? What are your do's and what are your don'ts? What line will you not cross?
That's a brilliant question, because since COVID, there's been a lot more free birth in this country, and I
Mhm.
presume across the world, where women are more aware that in the midwifery services where staffing was tight, where there wasn't so much opportunity for them to receive care at home, they have been making the decision to give birth without any medical care whatsoever. And it is absolutely vital for women to understand that if they hire a doula, they are not hiring someone who steps up to become an independent midwife. If what you want is medical care, you need to hire a medically trained independent midwife to attend your birth with you. If what you want is someone that's going to feed you snacks, remind you to pop to the toilet, rub your brow, maybe massage your back, and give you words of affirmation, who fully understands your philosophies, became a really good familiar face during the pregnancy because you met many times, you built a strong relationship, you trust them to advocate for you in medical situations where they can speak and say, okay, so let's just remember what you wanted. Let's ask some more questions. Let's understand why the doctor is recommending this in this moment. And let's talk about what might be relevant to your decision making process. If you want someone that is there that you really do have a great connection with, but doesn't provide any medical care whatsoever, then of course a doula is someone who is a good person to choose in comparison. If, however, you want to free birth, a doula might still be useful in all of those scenarios, but cannot provide you with any medical care. So if your baby comes out and isn't breathing, you are the one to resuscitate your baby. If you start to bleed, you are the one that needs to administer something holistically, or call an ambulance or request for some more care, not your doula. Your doula is not there to be that person. They are only there as an extra pair of hands in terms of the support. They might be taking photographs, they might be helping you to get washed and dressed in that postpartum period, but they are not going to measure blood loss, and they are not going to be there to provide you with any medical care whatsoever. So I hope that made that clear.
Even lay people are trained to do things like CPR. If you're walking down the street and someone needs medical attention, you might be able to use your training to help that person. So with a doula, is there a point where there's a line they're crossing? Let's say the mother needed medical attention and they were skilled to give that attention. Could they provide that, or would they just have to call emergency help?
So, my understanding is if you are a trained midwife and you act in a doula or birthkeeper role, legally, no, you are not there to provide that level of care. What you agree with that parent in your own circumstances is different. And I don't know whether people do cross the line in that way. But I do know that some people are no longer allowed to call themselves a midwife, but they are in fact midwives. It's just that the organisation that they may have registered with in the past, they've deregistered with, and therefore they've still got all the competent skills. They're not classed as that. So that would be a private conversation between client and birthkeeper if that were to be a scenario. But that's not something I'm involved in or aware of, because I'm just not, I've never been medically trained.
Okay. And can you just mentioned birth keeper. Can you clarify what a birth keeper is?
So to me, a birth keeper is slightly different to a doula in as much as they do have slightly more of a role where they are more likely to attend free births, more likely to support women in their stepping into their own power, more likely to be with that person in a way that enables them to make decisions that they making outside of guidance, if that makes more sense.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it does. Thank you for clarifying. Is there a time when you've had to support a woman who wanted to have a home birth with a midwife present, who, for whatever reason, staffing shortages, can no longer attend that birth and is now being invited to come into the unit, but the woman is quote unquote refusing to and is now almost being labeled as a free birther? Have you ever been involved in those kind of situations?
Yes, many times. And that is a really interesting conversation that I have to have with the midwives. And I will say to them, you are putting me in a very difficult position because she isn't going to come in and you are not coming to attend the birth. And I want to make myself very clear that I'm not going to be providing her with the type of care that they will be providing her with, because obviously our roles, midwife role, doula role, are very different. I've also been in situations where the woman has been very happy about the fact that the midwife isn't coming and is more than happy to continue. Or I've been in situations where the woman is actually really upset about that and labour has stalled. I've been in situations where the midwife has called an ambulance on the midwife's behalf, not the couple's behalf. And I've had to go to the door and tell them that they are not allowed in because the parents haven't given permission for them to be called and therefore they don't want them in their birth space. I've been in a wide variety of different scenarios, and since COVID times, it's really increased. Prior to COVID, if a woman dug her heels in and said, I'm not coming, they'd usually muster someone up and send them over. And they'd say, oh, all right, we've told her she's got to come in and she's said no, so we'll find someone and send them. But since COVID, completely different rules, completely different set of circumstances. The midwives haven't had to attend in those circumstances, and so they've been able to say, we're not coming, full stop. It's up to you what you do next. It isn't a pleasant thing to be on the back of, because usually if a woman has called the midwife, she wants one to be with her. And it does make it very hard for us to have to support her through that when she's trying to have high levels of oxytocin and she's very filled with adrenaline and very disappointed.
Hmm. Forget even being pregnant and strangers suddenly started walking through your door, you'd be wondering what was going on. Why are you here? What, like there'll be so many things going through your mind. So imagine being in that vulnerable state of giving birth, and now you're in a strange environment with all these faces that you don't know. Of course labor is going to stall. They show up to hospital and then like nothing happens, like the contractions disappear. And then it's, well, let's offer you the drip because your body's not really doing anything. And of course that just kind of is the start of just derailing the birth, because it can never happen quick enough for the hospital. It's always, well, we need to get this going, we can't keep you pregnant forever. And
Yeah.
that's literally what happens on labor ward.
Yeah, for sure. And once you meddle with physiology, you are now having a managed birth. You are not having a vaginal birth that's considered normal or natural, which I think many people confuse because they say, oh, yeah, no, I did have a normal birth. But then they list off all of these interventions and wonder why it was so difficult for them, because you changed physiology. You meddle in the process, you are now having a managed birth. So it's either physiological or it's managed. You can't have it both ways.
Absolutely. Have you ever supported a woman who has been laboring for a few days and quote unquote nothing seems to be happening, and is kind of maybe in her head a little bit, and maybe that's what's stalling the labor? And how have you helped her to kind of come out of being in her head?
I always say that I can get anyone to achieve a physiological birth if they let me.
Hmm.
If they don't, then I can't do anything, because if you are in your head, no matter how much you spend on birth support, you are not guaranteed to have the birth of your dreams, because you absolutely are solely responsible as the birthing woman. You are solely responsible for your own behavior. And I can support you with words, with my actions, with my touch, with anything I can do to support you to make sure your bladder is empty and that you are nourished and that you are in a calm and wonderfully perfect environment. But I can't make you get out of your head if you're remaining in it. And so this is all about the work we do in pregnancy. And when people say do the work in inverted commas, there is a lot of work to be done, because of course, for some of us, the subconscious mind holds so much more than we realize. There might be generational trauma. There might be really deep wounds from listening to our mother talk about how we were born and how traumatized she was from that experience. There might be trauma from our own experience of being born that we are holding on to. There might be so many things about the things we believe about ourselves, that we're not capable, that we're not strong, that we are powerless, that we're good girls, that we are in a mindset where we like to please people. When you think about the description of how the body works, you've got the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, or you've got the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. Now, in addition to fight or flight, we've got freeze or fawn. And some women in situations during labour and birth can disassociate because that's what they did as children. They may have been put in situations where it was easier for themselves to do that. And when you fawn, when you're in a situation where you want to people please because you don't like the idea of the caregiver harming you or hurting you, you may comply and agree to things being done to you that you actually don't want, but you're too scared to say no in that moment because it doesn't feel right. You want the person to like you. So these are all things you need to work on in pregnancy, or pre-pregnancy, ideally, if you can. But certainly we see this a lot in women who have had a baby before, were deeply traumatized by that experience, and before they ever get pregnant again, they know how they want to give birth. They're either going to go straight for the planned C-section because they couldn't possibly face the idea of putting themselves through what they went through last time, or they are going to do that work, deep work, that really does tune in to the stuff that they need to do in preparation for them stepping into their power next time, because they will not allow those things to happen to them again. And so it's really important to communicate well and to think about, what are you like as a person? What have you got going on inside you that could rise up and sabotage your birth on the day? What was your birth partner's experience of childbirth? What was their stories like growing up? What did they hear? What do they believe? What is it that stops them from trusting you, potentially? What do they need to address? And so all of these things can really help inform your journey, really help you to work on areas that you know would be worth doing. And ideally, then you can avoid many of these things.
Is there a time you've had to support a woman who was very keen on a home birth, but based on your experience, you maybe thought a C-section would have been better for her and her baby?
So I support all birth. I don't
Mhm.
mind where you give birth and how it goes. All I would say is that I will support every single decision that you make, regardless of what that is, regardless of what the outcome of that would be. My role is to 100% encourage you to tune into your instincts. And if you are allowed to do that, in my experience, you would never ever put yourself or your baby in danger. No one has a greater interest in the health and well-being of the baby than the mother, also of herself, of her own physical well-being. And so the answer is no. I've never ever witnessed a woman put herself in danger because at any point she can change her mind. It's never set in stone, regardless of any decision you make. Nothing is ever set in stone. And so if in one moment you say to yourself, I'm not going to do that, I don't want to do what they say, and 10 minutes later they change their mind, then as the doula, I'm usually the one dispatched to make the phone call or to go outside and ask the person to come in and that they've made a decision and this is what we're going to do next. And that's when women make decisions based on information and support, they will never regret those decisions. Never. And I work with a safety word. So I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before, Rosemary, but I think your listeners will find this very valuable. If I encourage a client to have a safety word, the idea is that she can vocalize as much as she wants to in labor and know that we will not try to rescue her. So if she's having moments of doubt and wobbles and saying, I can't do this anymore, I don't want to do this anymore, she can say that 100 times and we will say, you can, you are, we believe in you, we trust you, you're doing great. If, however, she changes her mind and she knows instinctively that something is wrong, she can look us in the eye and she can say her safety word. And at that point, we say, we're listening. What are your options in this moment? What would you like to do next? And we'll talk about plan B. Otherwise, it's plan A all the way. And so when I'm working with women in this scenario, if they ever think something is not right or going well, we switch to plan B in that moment, just like that, because she knows that she will never regret making a decision because she's feeling a bit tired, because she's feeling a little bit like she can't do it anymore. She will never quit the race. She will, if you use the marathon analogy and you think about someone who has trained for 9 months to run a marathon, maybe it's the London Marathon or the New York Marathon, and it was really important to them. And then on the day of the race, they're like, I'm not sure I can do this anymore. And they're running past you and they're crying and their feet are bleeding. You wouldn't run in and rescue them and say, come on, I'll put you in the car. Let's go to the pub for some lunch. You'd run beside them and cheer them on and say, you can do this, you've got this. If they did break an ankle, you'd be the first one to say you did so well to the point where you had no choice but to stop. And that's what's so important, is that sometimes plan B or plan C become essential. But when those decisions are made, when a woman is in her power and feeling her instincts, she will never regret them. She will never feel that she was duped into having a procedure that she didn't want or need, and that she knew that her baby really did need to be born, or that she needed to do something in that moment to change what was happening because things weren't right. And so that, I think, is a really important tool that people can utilize if they want to, and that their birth partner can feel really confident in spurring them on each step of the way. You've got this, you can do this, unless they use their safety word.
Now that's amazing. And it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the podcasts I listen to is called The Midwives Cauldron. And
Yeah.
one of the hosts, Rachel Reed, she was talking about when she would, support women at home. And again, they can wail out and, do what they want to do. But if they say hospital, then she kind of has to take them seriously. And, if that's where
Yeah.
you want to go, and you think that you've hit the wall and you want to change course, then absolutely we can do that. And I thought that's a brilliant thing to have established. And also the woman knows that you're not just going to push her all the way with plan A, when really in her mind she's actually maybe feeling like something's wrong, and she won't be afraid to say it. I think that's also really important.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely. Women know when things are not
yeah,
going right.
yeah,
Always,
absolutely.
always trust the woman.
Yes, I agree. And your own podcast, The Ultimate Birth Partner, is one that encourages women to take back ownership, of their
Yeah.
own health, their own birth choices. What would you say to aspiring doulas who want to support women to do that? How do they go about doing that and really putting and encouraging women to take ownership?
There are many amazing doula training courses, and I'm a member of Doula UK. I'm also a mentor for Doula UK. And looking at your options, deciding whether or not you'd like to become part of an organisation like Doula UK or not, you don't have to. And then choose your course wisely. Make sure that you look for a really good mentor that you can either pay privately or as part of your course. Because I do think that it's a very good part of the process, the journey to letting go of your ego, letting go of your thoughts and beliefs about birth, and reminding yourself that this is not your journey. You may be stepping onto someone else's journey for a short while and helping them to develop their own philosophies of birth. But ultimately, if you do find yourself in a position where, let's say, you love home births and that's your thing and you really like it, and then you get a client who mid-pregnancy decides not to give birth at home anymore and she wants to have an induction in hospital, you need to know how to support that woman too. You need to not abandon them in the moments that they need you the most, because as you become that familiar face, as you become that support person, that expert to some extent, you're never an expert in their body, but you are a confident, trained individual with experience that they look to for guidance and support and knowledge. And therefore, you're the expert in information sharing and helping them to gather the right level of information. So choose your course wisely, speak to other doulas, make sure that you really do be true to yourself in what you do. Look into it deeply, because it is a wonderful thing to be able to achieve, to support other women on their path.
Thank you for this conversation, Sally, and I think it's been brilliant. And before, I get you to share how women or people can get in contact with you, is there any lasting words or any advice you want to leave the listeners with?
There is actually. You started this conversation by talking about how midwives and doulas work together,
Mm.
and how sometimes doulas get a bad rap because they are brought in by women privately. They're paid by the women as if midwives are not paid. You're also being paid to support that person. And if she has gone to the trouble to interview someone, to pay out that money and bring them with her to her birth, there's a really good reason. And you should, if you are working as a midwife in the profession, you should really respect that decision and trust that she's probably got quite a lot of trauma and that she needs that extra support, that familiar face. And that person isn't going to go off shift like you are. They are continuity of carer. They are supporting the partner 100% more than they're supporting the women usually. And they are helping the partner to do their role, to feel confident. And even though you would like to do that, the problem is, if you are an NHS midwife or a midwife in another capacity across the world, you probably have a lot of paperwork. And they are there to enhance your role, not completely squash it and make it more difficult for you. They are not the voice of the woman. Usually, if the woman has asked the doula to come out and chat to you, it's not that the doula is giving their point of view. They are sharing the woman's point of view. So ask to read their birth plan. Ask to have a conversation with that woman in as early of that process as you possibly can, if it is relevant. And make sure that you don't infantilize that woman by making it seem like she isn't capable of making her own decisions. She is a sovereign person in a sovereign body. And if she says no to something like a routine vaginal examination, it's not her doula that's saying that. It's her. And you should respect that. And that's it, really. That's my last comment.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I actually have to say some of the bad rap comes from, I mean, I can talk about situations where it's another midwife in another room who has a doula present with the woman. And let's say the midwife is trying to converse with the woman and the woman is saying absolutely nothing. And it's the doula who's speaking on her behalf. And that's all well and good. She's got the birth plan, the midwife has read it. Here's my slight problem. Being in that kind of environment doesn't encourage women who take ownership. But I think that's really the bottom line, because there's almost legalities. The midwife can't really have a conversation directly with the doula and say, hey, would you like X, Y, and Z? Is it okay for me to do this? Are you hungry? And the doula answer, and then the midwife documents that, because legally that's not
Yeah,
the person that she's looking after. Because and I hate these type of sayings, oh, if it went to court, blah, blah, blah. Well, yes, in a court of law, you can't really say, well, the midwife told me no, so I typed no, and that was that. You will still be asked, but the woman herself did not tell you that. So I think that's where some midwives get an issue with, well, I'm not able to have a conversation with the woman. Yes, the doula has told me this, but she's also in a hospital environment, and it's governed by assessments and protocols and guidelines and all these really silly things. So in
mm,
a way, we do need to have a conversation with the woman, which is why, I mean,
absolutely.
I don't think the hospital is the right place for most women to give birth, because it just doesn't encourage this type of independent and sovereign way of birthing.
Yeah. A good doula will share that information with their client and say, you do have to be the one to say no. It does need to come from your mouth, or it's on your birth plan or whatever. I would also encourage every single person that perhaps is wanting to give birth physiologically, if there is a home birth planned, or if they are going to the midwife led unit and they are going there against medical advice. Let's say, for example, they had a cesarean section first time around and they don't want to have some of these minor interventions in the midwife led unit. Get that conversation documented with a consultant midwife or another member of staff that is able to have a personalised care plan put in place for you in advance, so that, again, the woman has expressed her preferences privately to that midwife who has documented them, so that those conversations have at least taken place. And then on the day, it becomes much easier for the midwife on shift to be able to say, oh, I can see that the consultant midwife had a meeting with her 4 weeks ago. She's covered all of these things. They've gone through the risks and benefits. They understand exactly why she's choosing to decline whatever it is that she's choosing. And then that, again, lessens the issues that might go on. But a doula's role in that scenario might be to be an advocate and say, after the fourth or fifth time, I think she said no, and speak up for the woman in that sense, but only when the woman has spoken up for herself. I think that is really important and valuable that you raised that, Rosemary.
I think you've clarified that well as well. And I think this is where some of the strife comes in, because some midwives just find it difficult and to navigate conversations. When I've seen a doula in the room, I know that this is a woman who actually knows what she wants. In a way, it makes it easier to have conversations because they're a lot more direct. It's less wishy-washy. They're less likely to just give in, which then reduces the trauma in the aftermath when you see them again in a postnatal ward and they're almost having the regret, and you can see on their face, you can see that they're not happy, you can see they haven't had the birth experience that they genuinely wanted to have. I'd rather we have the doula and all the conversations prior. Do you have the birth that you really dreamt of? Then you have, the regret and the trauma afterwards. Actually, I think it's so much more important as well for the bonding, between mother and baby, between mother and the father as well. Like it influences everything.
Absolutely.
Oh, Sallyann, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much. And if people want to get in touch, please tell us how we can reach you, your socials, all of that good stuff.
I've loved it. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm on Instagram at the ultimate birth partner. I have a website, sallyanberesford.co.uk, and you can email me hello@sallyanberesford.co.uk. I have a freebies tab on my website, so you can get some freebies on there. You can listen to my podcast, and that's called the Ultimate Birth Partner Podcast. My books you can buy on any online website, and the second book, The Art of Giving Birth, I actually give away the first chapter for free, and that goes through the difference between a physiological birth and a managed birth. So it's a really useful standalone chapter that you can get from my Linktree link on the Instagram page. So feel free to follow me there and get your free copy of that chapter.
Perfect. And we'll list the information below
Thank
on,
you.
on here as well. That's amazing. Sallyann, thank you so much. And to the listeners, thank you and hope you've enjoyed. And please do reach out to Sallyann. She's a great source of information. I enjoy your podcast as well. Thank you for being on here.
Thank you.
I appreciate you for listening or watching. If you'd like to get in touch or have a story you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach us through our website, houseofrosemary.com, or on Instagram, House of Rosemary, where we share posts on herbs, periods, and pregnancy. Take care.